In the dark recesses of the human mind, primal thoughts generally exist for self-survival rather than humane emotions toward fellow humans. It is through human contact that we become aware of the suffering of others, and with that contact, our own emotions evolve. But what if the feelings of compassion are dulled from an early age? What happens to the human personality then? Do we become inconsiderate, sociopathic, or even psychopathic toward our fellow humans? Our profile demonstrates the product of a poverty-stricken, morally bereft atmosphere, where his only solace came from the belief that one day he would be taken from this life. But along his journey to the final destination, every decadence, perversion, and callous temptation proved insatiable. Born to immigrant German parents Johann and Matilda Panzram, Charles Carl Panzram entered this world on June 28, 1892, in East Grand Forks, Minnesota. Panzram was born into a brood that consisted of 5 brothers and 1 sister. Eventually, 2 of the brothers died. From a very early age, Panzram characterized himself as a, quote, thief and a liar, a despicable one at that, end quote. His father and mother separated when Panzram was 7 years old. His father abandoned the family, leaving the children and his wife to a hardscrabble existence as the older male children would leave when they could, leaving Panzram with his sister and mother to work the farm to survive. Panzram and his sister attended school during the day, and as soon as they returned home in the evenings, they worked on the farm until the sun went down and beyond. Panzram reflected during these times that the only thing he earned consisted of routine beatings and hard work. Panzram consistently fell victim to those who were stronger than he and suffered many beatings as a result of a perception that anything he did was not good enough. This treatment occurred from whomever Panzram encountered at this young age. At the age of 11, Panzram came to the realization that other places existed in the world and he wanted to see them. However, he also recognized that he was raised as poor, and seeing not everyone in this world would be expected to treat him as human. Panzram noticed there were other people in the world who lived easy lives, and he wanted to live that easy life. Because of a lack of education and substantial support system, Panzram saw only one manner in making his way in the world. At 11 years old, Panzram caught a freight train going west in the hopes of becoming a cowboy where he would hunt Indians. In his first attempt, Panzram was caught and returned to his home where his mother, quote, beat him half to death, end quote. Before he went on this journey, Panzram stole some cake, apples, and a revolver from a neighbor's home. Because of the theft, the court sent the young incorrigible to the Minnesota State Training School for Boys. It was there that Panzram learned what he termed, quote, man's inhumanity to man, end quote. When the young man arrived at the school in 1903, the administrators at the training school tried to drill into the inveterate young man the fire and brimstone of the Christian religion. When Panzram refused to comply, the administrators retaliated with vicious beatings. This drove the young man into more deep hatred for his tormentors, and he began to think more for himself, or so he claimed. Panzram solely contemplated revenge, not only on the people that caused him so much pain and abuse, but also on the rest of the world. If Panzram could not take out his revenge on the person who abused him, anyone would do. A mode of thinking that Panzram followed until the date of his execution. Panzram once reflected,
"During my 20 years in all the various prisons and jails I've been in, I've undergone every kind of abuse and punishment that the ingenious minds of many men could devise. And believe me, men can surely figure out some horrible tortures to impose on other men."
These anguishes caused Panzram to hate mankind even further, to the point of when he tortured others. His execution of those tortures took on new heights. In an effort to seek some revenge, Panzram, when working in the serving line of the correctional officers' cafeteria, urinated in their soup or beverages, or masturbated into their ice cream and observed them digesting the substances. He got a real kick out of that one. On one cold winter day, Panzram went to the laundry room and then attempted to escape. Captured by one of the correctional officers, Panzram suffered an horrific beating. At this time, after the intense suffering, Panzram became more cynical and put some rat poison into George Mann's rice pudding. For that, he was caught and again beaten severely. As a result of this beating, Panzram set fire to a building on the campus where the, quote, paint shop, end quote, was located. The whole compound burned down. For this, Panzram was especially proud. Some of the other boys suggested to Panzram that he act like a, quote, good boy, end quote, say he wanted to be a preacher and wanted to go home. The young miscreant followed their advice and soon saw parole. At the age of 13, administrators pronounced Panzram to be a, quote, nice, clean boy of morals, as pure as a lily, and a credit to those in authority in the institution where I had been sent to be reformed, end quote. Panzram said that he learned how to be a Christian and a hypocrite, and actually earned an education in how to commit crimes, and how to get good in executing those crimes. Panzram decided then and there,
"I made up my mind that I would rob, burn, destroy, and kill everywhere I went, and everybody I could as long as I lived."
When Panzram walked out of the gates of the training school, administrators gave him $5, a new suit of clothes, and a train ticket to home. He spent the $5 on candy and fruit, rode the train home, and when he walked into his mother's house, she took the suit away from him, gave him some overalls, and marched him right back to the fields to work. At the age of 14, Panzram decided to jump the rails and ride as a hobo. He learned to ride the trains, both inside and outside, without paying any fares whatsoever. Panzram fed himself through lies, begging, and stealing. Occasionally he worked, but mostly avoided any labor whatsoever. The experiences he endured during this journey shaped Panzram for the rest of his adult life. One night he felt lonely and decided to walk along the outside of a train to find someone to talk to. He happened across a boxcar where, quote, 4 big burly bums, end quote, sat around. When the young teenager walked into their midst, Panzram told them about the warm boxcar he just left, and they asked him to lead them to it. When the car door was closed and the train left the station, the men repeatedly raped Panzram. It happened again later, but this time the second group of men used kindness as a manner to get what they wanted from the boy. Then, Panzram adopted a mindset that made his lot in life more violent.
"Might makes right,"
he often stated. In 1905, while traveling through Butte, Montana, police arrested Panzram for small petty larcenies and placed him in a large communal cell with 50 to 100 other grown men. He later appeared in court and was sentenced to 1 year in the Montana Reform School in Miles City, Montana. One correctional officer in particular, a man named Bishart, who Panzram described as a, quote, ex-prize fighter, end quote, made it his mission to torture the young man while incarcerated at that Montana institution. Panzram ended Bishart's abuse when one day near the end of his sentence, he struck the big former boxer over the head with a thick, metal-reinforced board. Quote, "It didn't kill him," end quote, Panzram remembered. Quote, "But it made him pretty sick." End quote. Bishart left the young man alone, but Panzram suffered further intense beatings at the hands of other guards as a result of his beating this guard. He and another young boy, Jimmy Benson, devised a plan of escape and agreed upon a meeting place some 40 miles away near a water tank in Terry, Montana. On the third day after the escape, Panzram waited at the water tank for Jimmy. Panzram soon fell asleep near the tank with an iron bar that he carried from the school since his escape. When he finally woke up, Panzram smelled food and walked around the back of the water tank and noticed an older man in a blue suit and a Stetson hat eating some food near an open fire. Just as Panzram attempted to sneak up on the man cooking, the man heard a sound and turned around with a revolver in his hand, only to discover that the noise he heard was Panzram's partner in the escape, Jimmy Benson. After that, the three celebrated. Panzram related that the man near the campfire had clothing for the two boys, and so they changed next to the fire. Benson and Panzram left the area and traveled for a month before the two parted ways. Panzram stated that Benson taught him how to, quote, stick up, end quote, people, and how to rob church poor boxes. Because of their robbery spree, Panzram and Benson each had about $150 and various watches, rings, and other valuables. More importantly, Panzram and Benson had firearms. On their journey, the two young men cut holes in the bottom of cars transporting wheat so that the harvests would leak onto the tracks. It seems that Panzram wanted to make sure that no one would prosper but him. In 1906, Panzram joined the United States Army and the 6th Regular U.S. Infantry, where he was stationed at Fort Harrison, Indiana, and after only being enlisted in the Army for a month, Panzram got into trouble for stealing and sent to the guardhouse. Subsequently, after a military court-martial, the Army sentenced Panzram to 3 years at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the military disciplinary barracks. Then Secretary of War William Howard Taft, future President of the United States, approved Panzram's sentence. At Leavenworth, Panzram attempted to burn down the prison shops, but he never accomplished this feat. He was constantly in trouble, and the whole time he was there, he wielded an 18-pound hammer in the rock quarry. In 1910, after serving 37 months, Panzram walked out of Leavenworth prison after performing the same act as he had to gain his release from the training school. He convinced the powers that be that he was a good boy and followed God. He received a new suit, $5, and a train ticket to Denver, Colorado. By this time, Panzram had grown to a sizable man, reaching 6 feet tall and weighing about 195 pounds. When he worked at the prison, he was one of the only inmates that carried a 50-pound ball around his leg. Panzram attributed this appendage to have strengthened him. Quote, "The worse the food got and the more they worked me, the harder I got," end quote, Panzram remembered. When he arrived in Denver, Panzram ran out of money, so he began working at a mule skinner's camp. But he soon caused trouble and the boss chased him away from the camp at gunpoint. Panzram went into Denver and bought a firearm. With the pay that he had earned from the mule skinning job, Panzram went to the red light district of town with the intention to become a big-shot mobster. But the next morning, after indulging in various vices the night before, Panzram woke up in an alley with no money and no weapon. That was not the only surprise, as a week later, Panzram learned he had gonorrhea. Panzram made his way back into Mexico, where he joined the Foreign Legion of the Constitutionalist Army of Mexico for the sole purpose of robbing churches along the routes where the army marched, but he was sadly disappointed. Shortly a month after his enlistment, Panzram deserted and made his way to Fresno, California. There he was arrested several times after robbing chicken coops and setting them afire. When he rode the rails, Panzram raped all sorts of men he would encounter. When he finally arrived in Fresno, Panzram was arrested for stealing a bicycle and sentenced to 120 days, of which he only served 30 before escaping. In 1912, when Panzram arrived in Dallas, Oregon, police arrested him for an uncertain charge where he went by the alias of Jack Allen. He broke from the jail there after serving approximately 2 or 3 months, according to Panzram's recollection. In that same year, Panzram traveled to Moscow, Idaho, where he attempted to break a safecracker out of jail so that Panzram could learn that particular trade. Under the name of Jeff Davis, Panzram was arrested and placed in the jail at Wallace, Idaho. After his release, Panzram was arrested in Chinook, Montana, for burglary, where he copped a plea and took a 1-year sentence. There, he served 8 months and escaped. Panzram was arrested 1 week later in Three Forks, Montana, for burglary under the name of Jeff Rhodes and sentenced to 1 year at the state penitentiary at Deer Lodge, Montana. Panzram served 2.5 years and was discharged. In 1914, while in the jail in Montana under the alias of Jeffrey Baldwin, Panzram practiced sodomy almost every waking moment of his incarceration there. When he left there, the warden supplied Panzram with a new suit, $5, and a train ticket to the next town. When Panzram arrived in Astoria, Oregon, he committed a burglary that police arrested him for not long after his arrival. The court wanted to make a deal with Panzram where he would plead guilty for a lesser sentence. He pled to the lesser sentence, but the court decided to sentence Panzram to the full sentence for the crime of burglary. At this jail in Astoria, Panzram attempted to set the place on fire. After guards broke through the door that Panzram barred, they put the fire out and proceeded to beat Panzram. Authorities subsequently sent Panzram to the state penitentiary at Salem, Oregon. While there, he met a man named Otto Hooker. Hooker and Panzram escaped, but in their hurry, Hooker killed the warden and made Panzram an accomplice. Sent back to jail after his capture, Panzram escaped once again in later 1918. Panzram then traveled to Pennsylvania, where he registered for the Army draft under the name of John O'Leary. After robbing a hotel lobby of $12,000, Panzram went to New York and joined the YMCA, the Marine Firemen Oilers, and the Water Tenders Union. With those memberships, and because of his extensive record in the search to bring him back to prison, Panzram obtained seaman's papers and passports and jumped ships headed for South America, first landing in Panama. Then he went to Peru, Chile, then back to Panama to run a gang of black workers, then made his way to Costa Rica. After leaving Costa Rica, Panzram traveled across the Atlantic to England, where he landed in Southampton. Spending a short period of time in Southampton, Panzram then decided to journey to Le Havre, where he joined a ship headed to Hamburg, Germany. From Hamburg, he traveled to other European ports and returned to the United States in 1920, where he landed in Bridgeport, Connecticut. In Bridgeport, Panzram robbed a jewelry store where he claimed to have obtained $7,000 in merchandise and money. When he fenced the material, Panzram received $1,500 in total. Panzram immediately signed on to a ship named the SS Manchuria and sailed for Hamburg, Germany. After 9 days of binges, Panzram returned to New York. In the summer of 1920, 5 days after arriving, Panzram went to New Haven, Connecticut, and robbed the home of a prominent politician, William Howard Taft, who by then was the former President of the United States. Panzram absconded with more than $40,000 worth of jewelry and Liberty bonds. Panzram also stole a .45 automatic. The criminal took solace in the fact that Taft approved his inhuman sentence to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Panzram eventually received $3,000 and kept some of the other materials he stole from Taft's house. With the $3,000, Panzram purchased a yacht, the Akiska. The vessel had room for 5 people comfortably, but Panzram soon hired some sailors to work for him. Quote, "Get them out to my yacht, get them drunk, commit sodomy, rob them, then kill them," end quote. Because of a lack of money, Panzram robbed other yachts in the marina of their alcohol so that he would have enough for his diabolical plans. Every day or so, Panzram sailed his yacht to the harbor in New York to hunt for sailors to victimize. Panzram lured the sailors back to the yacht by promising them a lot of money for easy work. plying them with alcohol and rich food, and after they went to sleep, he took off their clothes and fired a shot from the .45 into their heads, killing them while they slept. After ransacking the corpse, Panzram rowed a small rowboat out to the middle of the channel on City Island, New York, tied a heavy rock to the body, then dumped the body over the side of the boat. Panzram admitted that he did this 10 times within 3 weeks, and the dead bodies should still be in the channel. As Panzram robbed people with the ruse of providing work, he stocked his yacht with stolen property. So much property, in fact, that Panzram hired 2 young sailors to help him fence the stolen property. These 2 he didn't kill. Panzram did plan to kill the 2 sailors, but when he and the other 2 reached Atlantic City, New Jersey, the Akiska ran aground and Panzram abandoned the yacht before it sank. Panzram paid off the sailors when they made it to shore after the sinking, and they disappeared, never to be seen again. Panzram attempted to get to Connecticut, but when he did, he committed a burglary that got him arrested. He spent 6 months in jail for the crime and then borrowed $100 from his doctor to buy a ticket to Philadelphia. Panzram then retrieved his .45 automatic from the doctor. He went back to work as a strikebreaker and became involved in a gun battle with police. Panzram again was arrested, charged, given bail, then left without attending any further court hearings in that city. Panzram then went to Norfolk, Virginia, got on board a ship headed to Europe, and began robbing people when he got to the continent. From Europe, Panzram became a globetrotter once more when he traveled to Matilde in the Belgian Congo. From there, he went to Luanda, Angola, in Portuguese West Africa. When the company with which he worked learned of his sodomistic ways, they fired Panzram immediately. When he went to the American embassy to look for further work, the embassy kicked him out and would have nothing to do with him. While sitting in the park, Panzram noticed a young boy of about 11 or 12 years old who he committed sodomy upon and then killed him.
His brains were coming out of his ears when I left him, and he will never be deader. He is still there.
When Panzram made his way to Matilde, he stayed there a month. Unable to get a ship, he stowed away on an American vessel and made his way to the Gold Coast. From there, Panzram conned a ticket for passage to Lisbon, Portugal. Unfortunately, embassy officials knew about Panzram, and so to evade capture, he stowed away on another ship that took him to Avonmouth, England. Panzram just stowed away again and returned to the United States at the New York port. After his return to the United States, Panzram went to Salem, Massachusetts, where he murdered an 11 or 12-year-old boy with a rock. He escaped to New York and then to Baltimore, where he purchased a ticket to Jacksonville, Florida. When Panzram returned to New York in February 1923, he obtained employment as a watchman at a factory. He met a 14-year-old boy whom he abused until he left the job in April 1923. Panzram then returned to New Haven, Connecticut, where he obtained employment as a watchman and a caretaker of boats for a yacht club. The seasoned criminal robbed several yachts where he obtained firearms and money. Along the way, Panzram picked up a young man at the age of 18. When they arrived at Newburgh, New York, the young man became scared, so Panzram released him. This was the criminal's downfall. When the young man named George reached his home in Yonkers, New York, he went to the police and informed them of everything he witnessed and knew about Carl Panzram. The authorities captured the criminal, arrested him for sodomy, robbery, and burglary, and when he stood for bail, he offered his attorney a stolen boat, which the attorney accepted. Panzram stole the boat a short time before and then escaped when the court and the attorney used the vessel for the bail bond. The court released him and he fled to New Haven once again. When Panzram arrived in New Haven, he admitted abusing another little boy and then murdering him. In an attempt to escape further, Panzram attempted to board a ship headed for China. He obtained employment on an army transport, but the company fired him soon thereafter when he appeared at work inebriated. After his dismissal from this employment, Panzram attempted to rob an office in Larchmont, New York. where the police caught him after he tried to break into a train station. Tried in the court at White Plains, New York, the judge sentenced Panzram to 5 years in Sing Sing prison. Panzram spent 2 years, 4 months, and then prison officials transferred him to Dannemora prison. 18 days after his discharge on August 26, 1928, he committed 6 or 8 burglaries, and 2 days later committed another murder in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A week after committing the murder, Panzram committed a burglary in Baltimore and a murder in the summer of 1928, and then a short time later committed a burglary in Washington, D.C. at the home of a dentist, where police eventually arrested him. When police arrested Panzram, he voluntarily confessed to murdering 3 young boys, one in Salem, Massachusetts, one in Connecticut, and the third in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The murders would have to be investigated, but authorities sought to incarcerate the confessed murderer to isolate him away from society. Because of his extensive criminal record, the court sentenced Panzram to 25 years in Leavenworth Prison. When Panzram arrived at the prison, he issued a warning to the warden.
"I'll kill the first man that bothers me."
On June 29, 1929, Panzram murdered the foreman of the laundry room with an iron bar, a man named R.E. Warnke. Because the crime took place at a federal prison, authorities returned Panzram to Washington, D.C. to face trial and a possible death sentence for the murder he committed in Leavenworth. In the summer of 1930, a jury found Panzram guilty of murdering Warnke and sentenced him to death. They sent him to death row, where a young prison guard named Henry Lesser befriended the convicted murderer and began conversing with him on a regular basis. Lesser was an ideologue that believed the prisons of the United States needed extensive reform. When Panzram told the young guard about his prison life, Lesser believed this to be a story that should be publicized. Since the inmates were not allowed to have any writing materials, Lesser began secreting paper and pencil to Panzram as he waited on death row for his execution. He fought against any human rights advocates trying to save his life. In fact, he fought hard for them to just let him die. By the time Lesser collected the pages Panzram wrote, the autobiography took up 145 pages. On September 5, 1930, correctional officers at Leavenworth Military Prison led Panzram to the gallows. When the executioner placed the hood over his face, Panzram spat in his face. One of the prison authorities asked the condemned man for any last words, and he stated,
"Yes. Hurry up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around."
The only way to keep you alive! I don't want to be alive! I want out of these clothes! I want out of this body! I want out of this world!
Henry Lesser finally got Panzram's autobiography published in 1970 under the title of Killer, a Journal of Murder. The reason for the book taking so long to come to a bookstand is that at the time of its writing, the descriptions Panzram offered were too graphic for reading audiences in the 1930s. In 1980, criminologists at San Diego State University produced an hour-long interview with Henry Lesser. Lesser commented on the difficulty with having Panzram's story produced and provided a character profile of the serial killer. Lesser passed away in 1983 at the age of 82. In 1996, movie director Tim Metcalf brought Panzram's story to the big screen with his production of Killer, a Journal of Murder, named after the book. Metcalf related the true story of Panzram, where the title character was played by the always intense, always suspenseful, always masterful James Woods. Robert Sean Leonard of House fame played the part of Henry Lesser. The film, although it was panned by the critics, accurately portrayed Panzram's hatred for society as a whole. Until next time. If you enjoyed the content of this presentation, please hit the like and subscribe buttons and tell your friends or anyone you may know who has an interest in true crime. You can also follow us on Twitter at HistoryGuy63 and at our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/HistoryGuy63/. If you have any suggestions as to future content, please send us an email at truecrimemdi@gmail.com.